Hey everyone, it's Danny. Welcome back to the Unlock the Sugar Shackles podcast. I'm so thankful you're returning for another episode, and we have another phenomenal interview today with my guest, Mandy Harvey. I heard her on the Balanced Bites podcast, and I reached out to her, and I just had to get her on the show. She has such an inspiring story, and we delve into so many topics like self-sabotage, perfectionism. These are things that often derail my clients' progress. Her story is so impactful. She experienced childhood trauma and a near-death experience, and she's going to share her journey today in the episode. But it was so impactful on me, and it is so inspiring to hear her journey through healing and how she now helps others. So I'm going to read her bio. Mandy Harvey, she is also a fellow NTP like me. She is a leader in the field of trauma and healing, as well as an in-demand inspirational speaker. She specializes as a trauma healing guide for nutrition coaches, empowering them with the vital trauma-informed expertise and somatic help to lead their clients through successful behavior changes and lifelong transformations. Her superpower is showing coaches how to bridge the gap between their nutrition education and their clients' resistance to change by highlighting the importance of understanding how unhealed trauma impacts our behavior and beliefs. So I want to just say that today's episode is not for practitioners. Today's episode is for every person, and she does work with practitioners, but her story and what you're going to learn today is what clients struggle with, especially if we have experienced trauma in our lives, which is just so much more common than we think. So she also creates a safe and nurturing space. She helps coaches create a ripple of healing and thriving where everyone is capable of living their best life. Mandy's extraordinary story of transforming her own life from devastating childhood trauma and a near-death experience to courageously facing and healing. God, I'm going to get emotional just thinking about her story. Mentally, physically, and emotionally from the past, learning to embrace her authentic truth and designing the life of her dreams. It is the inspiration behind her bold mission to teach others that it is possible to do the same. So I have linked all of Mandy's info in the show notes. She also has a free gift for you guys, which we talk about. It's at stopyourbrainbully.com. So make sure if this episode resonates with you that you check out Mandy's information. And I'm so thankful that she took the time to be on the podcast today. And I really hope that on this podcast, yes, we talk about blood sugar, but everything impacts our blood sugar. Childhood trauma impacts our blood sugar, right? Because it can keep us in this chronically sympathetic state in that fight or flight nervous system that's going to drive up cortisol and impact our blood sugar. But beyond that, we are whole people, and we need to learn about these sort of let's say barriers that can come up that can prevent us from healing that we might have no idea. This goes well beyond, especially you guys might know this by now if you've been listening to the podcast for a while, that this is we need the whole picture of health. And then Mandy also does talk about in the episode how our blood sugar regulation impacts our emotional health. So it goes both ways. And that's what the beautiful piece is about this, is that I love having the opportunity to interview all sorts of experts in seemingly unrelated fields and see how that can help you on your blood sugar and metabolism journey. So I really hope you enjoy this episode with Mandy Harvey. Mandy, thank you so much for being here on the Unlock the Sugar Shackles podcast. Welcome.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited.
Yeah, I'm so excited too. I heard a podcast episode that you did, and I was just so taken aback by your story, and you have so much wisdom, and we're both nutritional therapy practitioners, so we have that likeness. And I love talking with fellow NTPs because we were trained in that same, sort of root cause, holistic paradigm, and I find that most often I really resonate. It feels like there's so much overlap between fellow NTPs. And so, yeah, I would just love to invite you to share your story with us. And today we're going to be talking about how trauma and, stress can lead to uncontrolled blood sugar stuff and nervous system dysregulation, which is impacting our blood sugar. So as much as, I talk a lot about light and carbs and fats and things are, I think by now I've had several guests on the show talk about the fact that traumas and stress and nervous system stuff are heavily, heavily related to our metabolic health. So take it away. I'd love to start with your story.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah, they are heavily related, and I had no clue. It was, uncovering that in my own journey that I had that big awakening. But what the big awakening was for me was that I had lived my life in a state of chronic stress from the time that I was, well, a baby, really. I was born into trauma. My mother was a single mother and was in her own traumas. And so what childhood looked like for me was having this inconsistency in love, in attention, in validation, and even her physical presence wasn't always there. I was alone quite a bit as a young child. And when we are developing those neural pathways and we're trying to develop the relational parts of what we need to feel like we can survive, that can feel very stressful and traumatic to a child when their caregivers aren't there. And so that big awakening I had with my health was really understanding, like, oh my gosh, I've been in stress my entire life. Like, that has been running under, it's like my blood, I call it my blood type was chronic stress. Because it was
I
so
can relate.
deeply embedded in who I was. So, I had a traumatic childhood. My mother is a single mother in her own, was doing the best she could, but was living through her own lens of trauma. And what that meant was not only was she not around all the time, but she brought men into our home that were very unhealthy and very toxic to not only her, but to me. I became the end point for some of the trauma and the abuse from them. And that looked like physical abuse, sexual abuse, emotional abuse, neglect. And so from a very young age, I had to grow up quickly to figure out, what is this environment that I'm living in and how do I protect myself? At the age of 14, the trauma I had experienced at a very young age, actually it started when I was 5, and it was off and on throughout my childhood. But when I was 14, my mom was married to a man who was a police officer, and he was abusing me pretty intensely for multiple years. And at a certain point, I had told someone at school about it. I had shared with a close friend of mine something that had happened. We went to the counselor, reported it to the counselor, and of course that gets reported, and you get a social worker, and there's a case, and there's a snowball effect of things that happen. Well, for me, when I understood that, I got panicked, and so I went home that evening and waited for my mom to get home from work. And our normal routine, even though we didn't have a great relationship, she was all I knew, so I loved her deeply. And we had these moments throughout our existence together where we would have connection, and it would feel like, oh my gosh, she loves me. And those were the moments. Every day after she'd get home, we'd go on a walk. And we walked along this path that had a little river next to it. And it was sunset, and the sun is, beautiful and flickering through the trees. And you can hear the water rustling. And we walked on that trail that day. And on the way back to our home, I stopped her and I said, hey, I need to tell you something. And I explained to her what happened at school that day. And she turned to me and just looked at me with anger and rage and said, how could you destroy our family? How could you do this to us? And it was in that moment where I took on this belief, this very embedded belief that I couldn't trust my intuition. I made bad decisions. My decision making was so bad that it destroyed families. And in that moment, it was like, okay, how do I remedy this? And that snowball had already started. But that belief and that fear and that stress carried with me for many, many years. After after we had had that conversation, a couple weeks had gone by, and there was investigations, and there were interviews, and they were trying to figure out the case on this. And unfortunately, my mom and the man that she was married to took their life as a result of the outcome of what would occur to them. They would be arrested, and they would be charged because of what had been happening in our home. They took their life, and in that moment, it was like my whole life had imploded. Everything I knew, everything that was normal, even though it was trauma, everything that was normal to me disappeared in a flash. And I was, moved. I moved physical locations, I moved schools, and had to figure out like what happens next. Of course, I started therapy and worked with EMDR to try and process at least the initial grief and the guilt, because I carried a lot of guilt in that moment that I was the one that pulled the trigger that took their life. And so we primarily just worked on that. But I was in therapy for my entire high school career. It was about a year or so after I started therapy where I got really, really tired of having to talk about what had happened. I would wake up every day and it would just ache. I would ache every day I woke up. My body ached. My soul ached. It was like, I can't do this. I never thought my life would end up that way. And I thought that was really the end of my life. I thought, how could life go on beyond this? Is there even a light? There's no light at the end of this tunnel. It was so, I was in so much despair and depression. And at that point, I thought the only way out is to take my own life, because I really, really missed my mom. I just wanted that connection, wanted that love again. And there was a day after school where I took a bottle of sleeping pills, a whole bottle. I swallowed one by one on my way back to school. And I blacked out. I don't remember getting back to school. And by the grace of God, I was saved. The only thing I remember from that moment is I remember waking up and I was in this golden space. It was warm, felt like the most loving, like if you could think of someone who just gives you these big bear hugs and you just feel this love. If you've ever had that experience, that's what this felt like. But it was bright and it was golden. And I thought, oh my gosh, I've made it. I'm going to get to see my mom. And I was so excited. I was like, yes, this is what I've wanted for so long, for so many days. And all I felt was a pressure on my chest. And it felt like a hand. And I was being pushed away. And all I heard was, it's not your time. And I woke up and it was at the end of the school day. Kids were rushing down the stairs. And I made my way home. But it was in bad shape. I was hallucinating. My heart felt like it was pounding out of my chest. I was shaking. I couldn't get my body to relax. And eventually I called 911 and they admitted me, and I was in ICU for a period of time. And then I was admitted to a mental institution for a period of time where I processed all of that. I was diagnosed with PTSD. I was put on medication, and I really went into intense work to work on that. And when I was 18, I graduated my therapy, and I thought, okay, I'm good, right? Like, we talk about this once, we're done, we're good. But I carried internally this panic, this anxiety, this fear, this worry of like, I'm not enough. And that continued to grow and grow. And the way I survived, or the way I tried to cope with it, really was taking on perfectionism. So what that looked like was I was trying to be perfect in my career. What is the career trajectory? I was trying to be perfect in my diet. And at that time, it was like, it was calorie restriction. It was no veggies. It was, like cottage cheese and celery sticks. Like I don't know what I was eating then, but it was not healthy. I was in a place of like, how can I control this feeling internally that felt so out of control? And I continued down that path, trying to keep this grasp on this feeling I just couldn't quite name, but I could feel it in my body. And that meant also working out, like punishing myself working out if I ate something that was not healthy. I would binge, I would purge, I would restrict, I would binge, I would purge, I would restrict. I was in this constant cycle. And when I got pregnant with my first child, my diet was kind of all over the place, but I felt like, I don't have to be so perfect with my diet because I'm eating for two now. I can kind of eat more than what I was used to, right? And I developed gestational diabetes with my first son. I delivered him, healthy baby. He was great. I got pregnant within 6 months, 8 months later with my second. With her, I had gestational diabetes. I delivered her as this healthy baby. And about 6 months after her, I was diagnosed with LADA, which is latent autoimmune diabetes in adulthood. And they said, okay, you're gonna manage this kind of like how you manage type 1. You're gonna be insulin dependent, need to manage your blood sugars. They gave me the educational meeting I had on how to manage this included, take more insulin if you want more carbs. And it was this little pocketbook that they gave me that was called Eat This, Not That. And it literally was like hundreds of items, hundreds of foods. And you looked at the food and it said, like mashed potatoes or French fries or whatever. And it would show you how many carbs, how many calories, and maybe a suggestion for what to eat instead. And they were like, here's something you can take with you when you're eating at a restaurant or making your food. And that literally was the advice. And so I'm like, okay. So, they tell me I can just kind of eat whatever and I just, take insulin, I guess. But I was also at that time working in corporate and I had a very stressful job. And I had 2 young babies, 2 young kiddos. My partner traveled a lot at that time. And so I was home alone, during the weeks, often with my kids, managing them, taking them to daycare, managing my high stress job, coming home. And I remember one night sitting at the kitchen table holding my daughter, and she was borderline colic. And so she cried a lot. And I just remember sitting there holding her thinking, when I'm here with them, I'm stressed that I'm not working. When I'm at work, I'm stressed I'm not spending enough time with my kids. Like, I just felt like I couldn't win in life. And I'm trying to perfect and be this perfect mom, this perfect employee, this person that says yes all the time and no, I don't need help. I can do it all, Like, it was, I could literally feel the weight of the stress just like pounding more and more and more on my body. And there was one night in particular where my partner was out of town and I had the 2 kiddos and I woke up with an extreme low. And my blood sugars had been on the roller coaster. The high highs, the low lows. It was like my doctors kept saying, well, just take more insulin, walk more, like it just was, I was in a bad place health-wise. And my blood sugar dropped really, really low in the middle of the night. It was like 40, something like that, really low. And I remember I woke up, in that adrenaline. I couldn't walk and keep my balance. And so I'm like crawling down the stairs to get to the kitchen. And I'm sitting on the kitchen floor with the refrigerator open. And I can just remember like trying to reach stuff to eat. And I had this like moment of like, this isn't working. I don't know what's wrong, but this isn't working. I don't want to live my life in this place, nor do I want to die early because my blood sugar is unmanageable, or like I was just thinking, like, I can't do this to my kids, I can't do this to myself. So I was like, whatever it takes, I'm going to find a different way, whatever it is. And a couple days later, I had found this fitness program. Actually, we were just talking about her, Emily Schramm. I came across, she had an article in a magazine, and I thought, oh, I'm going to try out this challenge that she used to run all the time. And it changed my life. Like within 4 weeks that I was, following this program with her, I was eating more, my blood sugars were stable, I reduced my insulin by 75%. I was, vibrant, I had energy, and all of a sudden I had mental clarity, which I was like, I've never had this before. My brain worked differently. I just felt like such a different person. I was like, I think my whole body has changed. Like, how is this possible with food? And I got so curious about it that I became a nutritional therapist. I was like, I got to know what this is all about. And I found the program and I got educated, and I'm drinking the Kool-Aid, and I'm like, yes, I'm going to go out and tell the world. Like, bullhorn, like, everyone needs to know this. I was so excited. And I started working with people out of a naturopathic doctor's office. And I was seeing people who had chronic fatigue, all sorts of chronic health issues. And I had my protocols and I knew how to work with them, and I'm helping them recover their health, and it was great. And what I started to notice, though, was these clients of mine who were similar in some of their health challenges that I had experienced in my past: chronic fatigue, autoimmune conditions. I also had, hypothyroid. I had, a couple of other, situations that were really creating stress on my body. And I'm working with folks who are in similar states. And at some point, I would notice them hitting a wall almost, and they'd fall out of these patterns, these behaviors, and into their old behaviors of not taking care of themselves. And I got really curious about what changes, like when we are on a trajectory and we're feeling good and we're doing well, why would we stop that? Like, why would we fall back into these old habits? And I got curious about their health history and started asking more questions about what was your childhood like, and, what was nourishment like? What's your relationship with food? And I started to see these patterns where everyone had a traumatic event or trauma in their childhood. And I started seeing this connection where they had never addressed it. And they were in their 60s or 50s or 40s, and they had just gotten to a point where their health was so bad. And so I thought, interesting, let me learn more about this. And I went to school and got educated and certified as a somatic experiencing practitioner, and learned about the connection between trauma and chronic health issues later in life, and how that really affects our biology, our beliefs, and our behavior, and how that impacts our willingness and ability to change our health and change our habits, if you will, around our food. And that's kind of where I've been led to today in doing this work. And I'll say that it's been very interesting. I work with nutrition and health coaches, helping them bridge the gap between their education, their nutrition education, and their clients' patterns and habits and sessions. But it's something that we don't often talk about when it relates to our health, is that this trauma that we experience early on changes us so deeply. And it creates this environment of chronic stress, and that stress just deteriorates our health over time. And for me, that was my situation. That was looking back after I had this health transformation and this awakening, was like, oh my gosh, I've been running on stress my entire life. And it wasn't until I really started to work on not just my diet, but my mental health, my lifestyle. I had to really stop pushing myself and notice all the ways in which I was pushing myself in my life, whether it was work, whether it was this belief of I have to be perfect, or was my, this perfect diet or whatever it was. I really had to dismantle all of those and embrace much more of a let's be gentle to your nervous system lifestyle until I got to a place where it was more stable. And then that was different.
Oh, such an incredible story. Thank you so much for sharing with us. And I think that so many, like the idea that trauma and stress, while it may look different from your story, it's manifesting trauma and stress, no matter what they are manifesting pretty similarly for a lot of people, even if we don't have this capital T trauma
Yes.
moment. I think a lot of us can relate to even just how, chronically stressed out we all are as a society. So
Yeah.
and I also noticed that I have a client and she said that she has a history of, childhood trauma and she'll be doing really well. And she's like, and I do this thing where I'm like, I know I need to eat, but I like won't feed myself. And it's like I see some self-sabotaging behaviors start to come up and it's just she'll like this will happen that people will be doing well for some time and then they just stop for some reason. So where can we start to kind of like unravel what is behind this and, what's going on when that kind of a thing is happening, showing up?
Yeah, I think it's first and foremost that awareness, right, of your pattern, and being self-aware. I think when we can take a step back and just be like, oh, I've really wanted to change my health. I really wanted to do this, but I'm noticing every time I get to this point, I pull back or I stop doing it. And instead of judging it and feeling ashamed by it or feeling guilty that I can't do this, those all create stress in the body. Let's set those down for a minute and just look at the pattern with compassion. Like, I'm trying to keep myself safe. There's a part of me that's trying to keep myself safe from this change. And just holding ourselves in that knowing for a minute and that awareness can often help open up ideas or suggestions on where we go from there. But first, I think we really have to acknowledge the place that we're in with compassion and with grace, with a lot of love, because oftentimes when we're self-sabotaging, it's not because we can't do it. It's not because we're, this isn't meant for us. It's not because there's something broken within us. There's a part of us that is so scared and is trying to hold on to what they know. There's an inner part of us that's really trying to hold on to something that they know. And what we know from the past may have been restriction, may have been, self harm in some way unconsciously. And so we have to really make connection with our bodies, with that part of us, and just give that part a lot of love. Most often,
Yeah.
and I can talk about my experience with this, I was definitely an emotional eater. I would have these really stressful days in my corporate job, and I'd come home and just like, eat waffles and syrup, even though I have, diabetes and I know I shouldn't be eating this. It was just like, there was a part of me that needed that comfort food in order to feel comforted and relaxed because of that stressful day. And so for me to be able to heal that emotional eating pattern I had really meant I had to make connection with that part of me that really needed that emotional eating as a coping mechanism. And slowly I was able to replace that with something else. But I really think first off, we have to have awareness of that pattern and really just give ourselves a lot of love before we move forward in that.
Yeah, that's a really powerful first step is like kind of stopping yourself and just
Yeah.
getting curious and coming at it with, a curiosity as opposed to a judgment, because I think we can all be pretty hard on ourselves and especially, having those perfectionistic coping tendencies, which I also find myself relating to as well. That that, perfectionism, it shows up a lot. And I think it's like we're using it as a coping mechanism to try to control, to try to gain love, or for, whatever number of reasons we might be manifesting that. But there's just no place for perfection in health. They don't exist in the same paradigm. And I think
Right.
so many of us are trying so hard to get it right, but it's like this over trying it's setting us back. So do you have any sort of, can you talk to us a little bit about how perfectionism can be kind of a little dangerous and damaging?
It's very dangerous. And to your point, there is no perfection in our health. There's no perfection in life. And I mean, there might be a perfect a perfect sunset or a perfect sunrise, but when it comes to ourselves, I think we need I'm giving everyone the permission who might fall into this category to set down that perfection. We are the ones that are putting that burden on ourselves, most likely because at some point in our childhood, we felt like we weren't enough as is for love, for connection, for attention. And in a child, that feels so detrimental that what we do is we turn it around and we say, there has to be something wrong with me. So I need to fix me. I need to be different, rather than realizing that belonged to someone else, that belonged to your caregivers. They were projecting something onto you that was unhealthy. You are perfect as you are. You don't need anything else to be worthy of love and affection. And that's why I think when we have this perfectionistic tendency, we really have to start to make connection with that part of us who feels like everything has to be perfect. And I have a 4-step process I walk people through to manage the emotions that come up when we are feeling like we have to be perfect, or we're feeling ashamed that we're not perfect, or something didn't turn out the way it should have. It's called love. L stands for listen, which means listening for the thoughts. I'm not good enough. I didn't do it right. They're not going to like me. Oh my gosh, my numbers are out of control. I must have really messed up. I have been in those doctor appointments about my blood sugar where I'm like, what did I do? And turns into perfectionism, right? That can easily be like, okay, I'm going to be so perfect. I'm going to do this and do this and do this. And, it's coming from a place of good intention, but it can easily slide into a place of toxicity if that's been a pattern of ours in the past. And that's because there's something underlying that perfectionism that really has to be dealt with. So it's listening to the thoughts, observing where we hold those thoughts in our body. So for me, I always held stress and anxiety in my stomach or in my intestines, and I would get bloated. I would get so crampy if I was stressed. And so observing where you hold that in your body, placing your hands on that part of your body and validating, that's V, validating the feelings, the thoughts, the emotions, saying, I can understand why you're feeling so stressed right now. Like I get it. These aren't the numbers we wanted to see on our blood test, or, we didn't do great on our meal prepping this week and our blood sugars were kind of all over. Or whatever it is, but it's really validating those feelings. It's okay to feel that way. I get it. It's kind of like how you would talk to a child or to your best friend. What would you say to them if they were really upset? And then E is experiencing love. So it's asking that part of us, what do you need right now to feel safe, to feel loved, to feel seen? Maybe that's, I need to go sit outside in the sun. I need a hug. I need to talk to my friends. I need to talk to, my partner, or whatever. If you ask intuitively, you will hear something. And it's just honoring that, giving that to yourself in that moment. And the more that we work through this process, when those emotions come up, the more we're creating a relationship with that part of us that held that trauma, that held that pain. And slowly over time, we can we can replace whatever coping strategy we have around perfectionism with something that's a little bit more healthy. So anytime I might start to feel the urge to emotionally eat or to make things around me perfect, now I might go outside and go for a walk instead and move that energy through my body instead of holding it in there. Because the more we hold those emotions in our body, the more stress we have. And that stress then raises our blood sugar. And then we get overwhelmed. And then we're in this cycle of having to chase a high blood sugar. And it just is not a cycle we want. We want to break that cycle. And so part of the protocol of managing your blood sugar really should involve managing your emotions, connecting to those parts of us that hold the perfectionism, that hold the fear, that hold the worry, and letting those emotions move through us so we're no longer holding on to those toxic feelings.
Yeah, that's so helpful. I couldn't agree more. So one of the questions that I have, especially as like a somatic person, something that I feel like I personally struggle with is knowing what I'm feeling. Some of my, I think, habitual tendencies in childhood were about like people pleasing and making sure everyone around me was happy. So it's like, doesn't matter what you feel, girl, you shove that down and you focus on those other people. So it's heavily people pleasing type stuff. And apparently when there's that and these lack of boundaries, there is oftentimes this disconnection with what you feel. And so I was wondering if you had any strategies for how to help people kind of get more in touch with what they feel, because I think that if anyone relates to me, like I might just find myself like, let's say eating something, but there weren't any perceivable thoughts before that happened. There wasn't like a feeling that I was aware of.
Yes.
So it's just like you find yourself in this behavior. So it's like I didn't have these, emotions, whatever they were. It's like we're not aware of them. So yeah, I'd love if you could talk to us about that.
It's same for me too. I didn't I didn't have thoughts ahead of time that I could tap into in my emotional eating. It was just like, I'm stressed, I'm eating. It was just like, whatever time span happened, I don't know where it went, but it was like stress, eat. It just, that kind of was the case for me. And so what that looked like for me was just noticing the behavior, noticing when I was stressed. First and foremost, we know we can tell to some degree when we're stressed. Like we all have some sense of like, oh, I feel really stressed right now. And so what I really did and what I've worked with my clients to do is just noticing how you feel, noticing your body in different environments. So when I am in my corporate job and I got all these to-dos and I'm on this deadline, what am I noticing? How am I feeling in this moment? I feel stressed. Okay. How do I feel when I'm on vacation? I feel relaxed. Like we can label to some degree because we've had different experiences. We can label to some degree what we feel like in our body. And then if I was to ask you, well, what does relaxation feel like to you? How do you know you're relaxed? Well, that might mean, I don't know, I feel like I can breathe a little deeper. Okay, cool. What happens with your breathing when you're stressed? Do you notice that? No, I've never noticed that. Okay. Next time you notice you're stressed, I just want you to see if you can remember to just check in on your breathing. Like, what is it like? And so we don't necessarily have to hear the thoughts yet. We could even pay attention to like, how am I in my body? I feel like my heart's really racing right now, or my stomach is really bloated. Why is my stomach bloated right now at work? That's so weird. I didn't eat anything, like just getting in tune with your body in different environments, just for research's sake. Let's just do a little bit of research on your body. How do you feel at the grocery store? What do you notice in your sense of self? What do you notice, like, are you just kind of moving along? You're okay. Great. How are you at the bank? How are you in a restaurant? How are you at your friend's house or your family's house? We're going to notice we're all feeling people, and when we've had trauma, we're definitely much more feeling people than anything else. We're the empaths, we're the highly sensitive people. And so to some degree, we can tell when we're in different environments that we might feel a little different. So do some research on what you notice, how you feel in different places. Okay, how do you feel on a walk? How do you feel when you're at the gym? All of these are going to give us clues of like, okay, well, I noticed when I was at the grocery store, I was fine. And then when I was at work, like I just felt like I didn't move my body. I got stiff. I got stuck there. Okay. These are all pieces of information that can help us go deeper. And the more that, for me, because stress was so chronic in me, I really focused on stress. So am I stressed at work? Yes, I'm feeling stressed. How do I know? My belly is bloated. Like, it was the craziest thing. After a long day, I would notice my belly's bloated. Wow, that's so strange. Like, I didn't realize I was holding all this stress in my belly. Another client of mine would get stressed driving, and she was like, I noticed my hands are like this on the wheel. So when we notice that we have some sensation in our experience of that, just see if we can release and relax just 2%. What would that feel like? Okay. What does your body feel like now when you relax? Oh, I'm noticing my hands don't feel so weird. So it's, for me, I think one of the best things is just to get curious about your body. We experience life through our nervous system. It's communicating through us all the time about different environments that we're in, where we feel safe, where we feel seen, where we feel loved, even around people. How does my body feel around? My Uncle Dwayne was the person in my life who just felt like gave the big bear hugs and just felt like the best person in the world. I felt so happy around him, and my body was like so excited and, relaxed. And if I was around someone else, it might not feel that way. And I could tell because once I started paying more attention, I gained more awareness. So I think I would encourage everyone just to start there. How am I feeling when I wake up in the morning? What do I notice? Oh, my shoulders are tight. Okay. Anything else? Just get curious. Maybe jot it down or just mentally start to pay attention. And over time, that skill set starts to evolve into being able to do more work with our feelings. Like, oh, I'm stressed and I'm feeling like blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, that's super helpful. I have also found help from like an emotions wheel. So where I could like
Totally.
choose the emotion because it was like, I don't really know what I'm feeling, but if I had a choice, it would help. So I don't know, is that something you use in your practice?
Totally. Yes. Sometimes we don't, words are helpful to giving us clarity, and sometimes we don't know all the words. And an emotion wheel can certainly expand our understanding of like, oh, maybe it's this or maybe it's this. I think those are super helpful, especially if we don't have that context just yet. I also think too, just the basics of like, I feel good, I don't feel good is good enough to start the process. Because at least we have some context and awareness of, okay, what does good feel like in my body? What does not good feel like? And starting to get curious. But yeah, those words can also be helpful. When we name what we're feeling, it starts the process of releasing it. It puts attention and light to it. And when we do that, it's no longer hidden within our body.
Yeah. So what is there anything that we haven't talked about already that you find to be either an area where people are commonly stuck, like some sort of a theme of like an emotion or a pattern or certain beliefs or something, or just something that's sort of like an easier, like a more of a first step for people on this journey of starting to connect a little bit more with what's happening underneath?
Yes. First, I would like to just, so I'm going to give an answer, but I'd like to share a study that was done that can kind of highlight this. So this is a study that was done in the 1980s, and it was a study done with 200 and I want to say 68 people. They were obese, and they were going through like a health weight loss program. And this study was done with the Kaiser Permanente, and they were looking at the effect of ACEs, so adverse childhood experiences. And that's a study that they gave to the participants. And what they found was 50% of the participants in this study had experienced some sexual abuse as a child. And they put these people, and that was just part of the data collection that they did on this study. And the purpose of this study was to observe them as they went on this weight loss journey. And halfway through the program, what they realized was that the folks who fell into that 50% category were struggling to lose the weight. And one of the participants that they talked to about it said, what I realize in the process of trying to lose weight is that all of a sudden I was starting to feel anxious. And I was starting to feel stressed every time I lost some weight. And they asked for more clarity, and they talked about it. And they said this, one participant said, having the weight on felt like a protection against any potential, abuse that they might experience again. And so that weight became this barrier, this block. And losing that felt scary, because all of a sudden they felt vulnerable. They didn't understand why, but all of a sudden they're starting to feel vulnerable. They're starting to feel overwhelmed and anxious. And I think that study really is an interesting one to consider when we're talking about the effects that trauma has on us as a child, and the beliefs that we take on. Might include, I'm not worthy of love, I'm not worthy of health or vitality, I'm not worthy of prioritizing my needs, I need to help everyone else. And when we grow up and we become adults and we have the regular stresses of life, the stress from that childhood plus the stresses of life today really put us in this place where we feel like we can't make progress. We feel like everything we do, we just don't get any results. I've tried all the things, nothing's working. And when we fall into a pattern like that, where we feel like nothing is working, I've tried everything, I would say that's the number one thing I see the most in folks that I work with, that I encourage people who fall into that pattern, if they're aware, if they know that they've said that before, if they've tried all the things and they just haven't got to the place that they really want to be with their health, then that's the place to stop looking for the solution, pause, and start to get curious about how the experiences during childhood might be influencing your ability to change today.
Wow. That is such a powerful study and example of, how trauma continues to affect us in such a strong and deep way that we have no conscious awareness of.
Right.
Like you would never connect the dots between those things, and it's just so wild how it really is so deeply pervasive. So how does someone begin to unravel that? Did we already talk about it with the awareness piece, or is there something else?
I think you start with the awareness, and if you do have trauma in your past, there's a lot that we can do to start to regulate your nervous system. So if you're in that pattern of I've tried everything, nothing is working, then most likely you're operating in a dysregulated nervous system state. You're operating in a chronic stressed state. And so doing nervous system regulation techniques, moving your body, getting outside in nature, doing breathing, meditation. There are a variety of ways. Do vagal toning, humming, shaking of the body. All these things can help move the energy through our body and bring us back to a place of bring some more peace into our body. But I would also say, and those are important, I think people should do them regardless. But if there is trauma in the past, and I think there also needs to be support in terms of reaching out to someone who's trained in somatic experiencing, who's trained to support you in really working with that and helping release it from the body. I think we can do a lot alone, but when it comes to healing trauma, that's something that we really should be doing with someone else. Because when we have a dysregulated nervous system, when we work with someone who's educated in that way, we can co-regulate to a healthy, balanced, stable, resilient nervous system. And the more that we can co-regulate with someone and learn these practices, the more we're able to gain resilience in our own nervous system and gain back our balanced blood sugars and the energy and, the emotional stability that we're really aiming for.
Yeah, that's great. And I definitely see the benefit of working with a skilled practitioner for things like this, because it's so complex, and I'm sure there's so much nuance because it is so personal to each person and how they experience things. So is there anything that we haven't talked about that you feel that you have on your heart that you want people to know if they are struggling with trauma, increased stress, and these subsequent manifestations in their health?
Yeah. I would want to say from my heart to theirs that they are seen. Like, I understand the place in which you're in, and it's not the end all be all. There is a place where there's a potential to really be on the other side of that, where you do have the health and the vitality and the energy. And I would just want to send them a lot of love and compassion and understanding that managing our health is hard. And managing health can be even harder when we have some of this underlying stuff going on. When we heal our health, it's so deeply connected with core beliefs that we hold about ourselves. And so I would just want to honor and send love and compassion to people in the journey that they're in. Want you to know that what you're trying to do for yourself is beautiful, and it's to be admired, that you're putting in the work and that you're invested in having health and vitality, and to not give up, and to consider, consider what we've talked about here as a potential path to look into. But rest if you need to, but don't give up, because there is hope on the other side of that.
I love that. Thank you for sharing that beautifully inspiring message, because I think so many of my clients, like, I just want to reach the screen and hug them. And I'm like, you're trying so hard, and it is such a beautiful thing that you're wanting this so badly for yourself. And I think that is in and of itself a sign that you are healing from this trauma. Like, that's a really beautiful place to acknowledge, like, I want to feel better. There's some belief in deserving that, right? Like, you wouldn't start if you didn't believe at all that you deserved it. So just looking at even just the desire to be more well, and you might know the things but not be able to at this moment put them into practice because you have these things inhibiting you, but that's okay. That's part of this, that's just part of your journey. And, some people are like 100% compliant, and that's not a thing. And some people just struggle so much with it. And it's that we all have these different childhood experiences. We have different life experiences, and we're not all starting on we're not starting from the same line, metaphorical starting line. It's just not that way. And that you will get where you want to go faster if you're able to say, maybe I need to pause learning incessantly about, what food should I eat for my blood sugar and what time should I do this and what supplements should I take, and go into this stuff that's unfortunately the uncomfortable stuff, and sometimes they say the only way out is through, and I really think that's
Yeah.
the case for a lot of these things. I'm actually starting EMDR next
Okay.
week, which I'm really, really excited about,
Awesome.
because I think that I don't have any capital T traumas that I am aware of, but I feel like I have a lot of lowercase t ones that are because I just relate so much to so many of these things and how I show up as like the people pleaser, perfectionist, all these things. And
Yeah.
it's like, oh, you must have a history of trauma. I'm like, what? No. And it's like, apparently I do. So you don't have
Well,
to have, a story like Mandy's in order to have
no.
these issues, but there are people like you too, where it's just, it's crazy that the deep, deep impacts in every area of life.
Yeah, absolutely. I just want to celebrate you for making that decision to get support in that way. That's awesome. And yeah, that's exactly right. We may not, and here's the thing. I always say, we can eat the greatest food, we can take the best supplements, we can, biohack our sleep, we can do all these trendy, healthy things, but if we're not seeing progress, then that's a sign to us that we have to look inward, that there is something underneath all of that. And if managing our nervous system, managing our emotional state, healing our traumas, if that's not a part of our health plan, then we're missing a really strong key component to how we can achieve our health. And we can only go so far in our health journey if we're not willing to go down that path. Unfortunately, it's, we can ignore it for sure, but if we ignore it, it just creates more and more distress in our body. So at some point we have to look there, and it is scary. I get it. I totally get it. It's not the fun, cool, exciting new gadgets, like it doesn't have a great PR marketing program. But it is so important for us to have that feeling of resilience in our nervous system. We're never going to get out of stress in life. We're always going to have it. So if we are able to manage it with more resilience and help our blood sugars stabilize in the process, and then we're able to show up in our life for ourselves and for others in healthier ways. And that just ripples out, in many different directions.
I love that. So, Mandy, where can people work with you if they are drawn to your message today?
Yeah, thank you. You can find me on Instagram. I'm Mandy L. Harvey. I do have a couple free gifts I'd like to highlight. If you're a nutrition or health coach, I have a free gift called Breaking the Chains. That is a video learning series all about how to support your clients and how to decode your clients' patterns and behaviors and really help show up for them with somatic, trauma informed skills and techniques. And so that's traumahealingforcoaches.com/break. And then I also have a free gift called stopyourbrainbully.com. And in both of those, you can learn more about me. Stopyourbrainbully.com is all about helping to heal the perfectionistic tendencies that you hold within and release them so that you can show up more powerfully in your life and not feel so bogged down by this brain bully who keeps telling you you're doing it wrong. Oh, you just made a mistake. Oh, those numbers are really bad. Got to do something about it.
Wow, that's great. We'll link all of that in the show notes for everybody, and I will definitely be visiting those links myself because I can certainly relate to all those things, and I definitely am eager to be able to support my clients better in this way too. So thank you so much for
Awesome.
taking the time to come on today, Mandy. It was
Yeah.
fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you so much.